You were never weak. You're simply trapped inside an invisible prison of you've mistaken for your personality. A prison called fear. You want to talk to someone, but you stay silent. You want to start a project, but you push it to tomorrow. You want to change your life's direction, but you freeze and you blame yourself. Why am I such a coward? But what if I told you the problem isn't that you're weak? The problem is that you don't see what's controlling you. Nearly born 10 years ago, inside a cold mountain cave, Miyamoto Musashi, a man who fought over duels without losing once, wrote down one of the greatest truths about fear that 90% of people will never understand. He didn't win because he was the strongest. He won because he understood fear more deeply than anyone of his time. He realized a harsh but liberating truth. Fear isn't your enemy. Fear is the cage, and you're the one sitting inside it. Today you'll learn how Musashi broke that cage, and more importantly, how you can do the same, starting right now. But before we continue, I want you to do something small for yourself. Hit subscribe to Life Philosophy. Here every video is designed to help you understand yourself more deeply and to live a life led by choice, not by fear. And tell me in the comments what fear is holding you back right now. Just writing it down is already the first step to breaking free. Thank you for being here. Now let's begin the story. Part Awakening. Understanding fear correctly. Lucas was the kind of person others silently admired. 32 years old, successful early, articulate, intelligent, polished in the way he spoke and carried himself. But there was one thing nobody knew, not even the people closest to him. Every important decision in his life was exhausting battle. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't a lack of knowledge. It wasn't a lack of opportunity. It was a tightness in his chest, a pressure so familiar yet so paralyzing, that held him still every time he was about to do something he knew he needed to do. When he needed to hire a new employee, he hesitated. When a relationship was clearly falling apart, he kept it alive a little longer. When he had to make a difficult call for his business, he told himself, "He'll do it tomorrow." Everything that needed to be done, he understood it perfectly. But the simple step between knowing and doing felt to him like crossing an impossible canyon, and he punished himself brutally for it. Coward, pathetic, why can't I just do what everyone else seems able to do? Every night, those words curled around his mind like chains. He looked at people making bold decisions, changing their lives, walking away from what no longer served them, and wondered, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do the same? What Lucas did know was this. He had fallen into one of humanity's greatest psychological traps, misunderstanding the true nature of fear. One day, by chance, he came across a sentence written by Miyamoto Musashi, and that single sentence split open the fog that had covered his mind for years. There is no fear of the unknown. There is only fear of losing what is familiar. That line hit him with the force of a blade. Everything clicked. He wasn't afraid of what might happen. He was afraid of letting go of what he already had, even when what he had was hurting him. Even when the relationship drained him, even when the job suffocated him, even when the version of himself he clung to was no longer working. Because the familiar, no matter how painful, always feels safer than the unknown. His brain, like all human brains, was silently whispering, "This is familiar means survival, not happiness, not growth, not truth, just survival." Millions of years of evolution had programmed his mind not to seek what was better, but to cling to what already existed, simply because it hadn't killed him yet. Suddenly everything made sense. Lucas wasn't scared of the future. He was scared of losing the present, even when the present was slowly destroying him. And that realization, something opened inside him. He began observing himself with new eyes. Each time he needed to decide something, he noticed the same sequence. A clear impulse, clean, direct, do it. A subtle flicker of fear rising in the chest. A negotiation with himself. Maybe later, maybe after I prepare a bit more. A postponement. Immediate relief. That relief was the hidden trap, a small hit of emotional comfort, a reward from his ancient brain for staying inside the familiar cage. Hours later, guilt would creep, but guilt never changed anything. Guilt didn't fuel action. Guilt only deepened the cycle. Lucas realized something frightening. He wasn't addicted to procrastination. He was addicted to the relief that procrastination gave him. That relief was the real prison, the momentary softness that kept him from stepping onto the battlefield of his own life. Then came the question that changed everything. If fear is not proof of weakness, if fears is simply a misunderstood mechanism, can I break it? That was the beginning of his awakening. For the first time, he understood that fear was not a storm. Fear was a pattern, a predictable cycle with predictable triggers, and anything that is a pattern can be broken. Lucas did not transform overnight. No one does. But from that moment on, something inside him shifted. He stopped believing he was broken. He stopped calling himself weak or defective. He stopped assuming fear meant something was wrong with realized. Fear is not your identity. Fear is a habit, and habits can be rewritten. From that day forward, he stepped into a completely different chapter of his life. A chapter where the first step was not to escape fear, but to understand how it works and reclaim the power he had unknowingly given away for years. The cycle Musashi saw through. Not everyone lives in fear, but almost everyone lives inside the cycle of fear. A loop so subtle and so quiet that people mistake it for their personality. Musashi called it the path of the hesitant mind, a closed circuit that repeats itself endlessly, tightening around a person until they no longer see a way out. Lucas began noticing this cycle only after days of watching himself closely, and the more he observed, the more he realized. This pattern was universal. It didn't matter whether someone was a businessman, an artist, a student, or simply a person trying to live a decent life. The cycle operated the same. It always began with a clear impulse. A clean, direct inner voice. Make this change. Take this step. That first moment was pure, the spark of evolution urging you forward. Then, just seconds later, a thin mist would creep in. Fear. Not dramatic fear. Not panic, not terror. But a subtle uneasiness light as a breath, just strong enough to shake the foundation of your resolve. What if it goes wrong? What if people judge me? What if I regret this? 3 small questions, yet powerful enough to make the heart contract. And then came the next stage of the cycle, negotiation. A quiet conversation with yourself. I'll wait a little longer. Let me prepare more first. Tomorrow will be a better time. It all sounded reasonable. Very reasonable. So reasonable that you believed it was wisdom, caution, emotional maturity. But the truth was much harsher. Fear was simply buying time. Then came postponement. The moment you chose not to act, your entire body loosened. A wave of relief washed over you, soft, warm, deceptive. And in that moment of comfort, you felt as if you had made the right choice. But you hadn't. You had chosen escape, your brain, especially the ancient part designed for survival, misinterpreted that temporary relief as proof that you had just avoided danger. It rewarded you with more relief, more calm, more of that addictive emotional softness. That relief was the real trap. Hours later, or maybe the next day, when the relief faded, something else appeared: guilt. Why didn't I do it? Why do I keep avoiding things? Why am I like this? The guilt gnawed at you heavy and sharp, but guilt was never strong enough to change anything. It did break the cycle. It deepened it, because now the next decision carried not only fresh fear but the weight of all past failures. You no longer feared just the unknown. You feared remembering that you failed the last time. You carried layers of self-doubt, layers of postponement, layers of inner disappointment. Fear no longer had one face. It had many. Fear of outcomes, fear of judgment, fear of loss, fear of failure, and fear of confronting the truth about yourself. Lucas realized how dangerous this cycle was when even tiny tasks began to paralyze him. A message left unanswered, an email that needed sending, an appointment that needed confirming. Small things became heavy because he had accumulated years of emotional debt from repeated postponement. The cycle worked silently, not with screams, but with reasonable whispers. That's why most people never realize they're trapped in it. And Musashi, a man who faced death every time he drew his sword, understood something modern people forget. We do not lose because we fear. We lose because we hesitate. Fear doesn't kill you, but hesitation, prolonged, repeated, internalized, it erodes your life inch by inch. When Lucas finally saw the cycle clearly, he understood. You cannot break it with motivation. You cannot break it with positive thinking. You cannot break it by waiting for fear to disappear. You break it only by changing your relationship with fear. Not by running from it, not by trying to limit it, not by waiting until you feel ready, but by looking directly at it, recognizing each step of its pattern, and acting before fear has time to speak. Lucas was about to enter the turning point of his life, the moment he would realize that this cycle could be shattered not through force, but through a strategy Musashi used his entire life, and that strategy begins with Mushin. The empty mind, the state where action happens before fear has a chance to rise. Part by Mushin, empty mind. The moment fear has no time to speak. Musashi once said something that sounds simple, but carries the weight of an entire lifetime of combat. In the moment you must act. Thought is what makes you lose. He wasn't talking about recklessness. He wasn't talking about blind action. He was pointing to a principle that almost every modern human has forgotten. The gap between intention and action must be so small that fear has no time to enter. Musashi called this state Mushin, the empty mind. But an empty mind doesn't mean mindless, unconscious, or apathetic. It means a mind free from the questions that destroy momentum. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if someone judges me? Mushin is the mind that doesn't cling to anything. No hesitation, no negotiation, no waiting for the right emotional moment. It is action that happens before fear can form a sentence. Musashi didn't learn this from philosophy books. He learned it on the battlefield, where being slower than your opponent by half a second could mean death. He once recounted that in his first duel at the age of 13, he didn't win because he was better. He won because his opponent hesitated for half a second. Just half a second, but enough to separate life from death. While the opponent was thinking, should I strike my weight? Musashi had already moved, and from that moment forward he realized a brutal truth. The one who thinks more loses, not because they are less skilled, but because they are slower. Fear always enters through the doorway of thought. If you leave the door open even slightly, it will rush in and take over. This doesn't just happen in combat, it happens in everyday life. Lucas began understanding Mushin when he looked at his own behavior. He had never failed because he didn't know what to do. He failed because he thought too long before doing it. A good decision, when given time for fear to intervene, becomes a bad decision. Not because the decision was wrong, but because fear twisted it. Lucas realized that if he wanted to change, he had to do something he had never done before. Act in the moment before his mind had the chance to interfere, not waiting to feel brave, not waiting for confidence, not waiting for perfect conditions. He realized that most postponement comes from a desire to feel more ready, more prepared, more certain, but all of these are just fear wearing different masks. When he read Musashi's line in the Book of Five Rings, the difference between the victorious samurai and the defeated one is simply that one acted and the other hesitated. He understood there was no turning back. From that moment on, Lucas committed to doing something that most people never dare to try: move before fear arrives. He began practicing Mushin in the smallest moments. When he needed to call someone felt nervous about, he dialed immediately, before thinking. When he needed to make a decision, he said, "Let's do it," before his mind created excuses. When he needed to say something important, he spoke the moment the thought appeared. Was he scared? Were his hands shaking? Yes. Was his heart pounding? Absolute. Then he discovered something profound. A truth only action can reveal. When fear arrives too late, it becomes powerless. If action happens first, fear becomes nothing more than a faint echo behind you. It loses its authority. It loses its ability to freeze you. Musashi didn't win because he was fearless. He won because he acted in the tiny slice of time before fear could even exist. Lucas began to feel this shift inside himself. Tasks he once thought were too difficult, too overwhelming, or not the right time became lighter when he didn't allow his mind the chance to complicate them. Mushin is not magic. It doesn't eliminate fear. It simply takes away fear's voice. And when fear has no voice, action becomes the only path forward. That is the first taste of freedom. Freedom from unnecessary questions, freedom from hesitation, freedom from the cage we build inside our own minds. But this was only the beginning. To truly break the cycle that had trapped him for years, Lucas needed a technique even stronger than Mushin, a principle Musashi called Ken no Sen, striking before the mind has time to interfere. Part no Sen, striking before fear takes control. In swordship, Musashi called a technique Ken no Sen, striking before the opponent even has time to think. But what most people don't know is this: he didn't use it only in duels, he used it in every decision of his life. And that single principle changed Lucas' entire existence. Lucas realized he had spent years obeying the voice of fear. He had allowed his mind to negotiate, postpone, rationalize, and justify hesitation. So if he wanted to break the cycle, he had to remove the chance for his mind to interfere. No time for it to say, no time for it to ask, "What if you're wrong?" No time for it to breathe out the familiar fog of fear, so he decided to try. He picked 3 decisions he had been avoiding for months, decisions he knew he needed but never had the courage for. Firing an underperforming employee who also happened to be his friend, ending a relationship that had drained both of them for far too long. Calling an investor to make a bold request, knowing he might be rejected publicly and decisively. Just reading those 3 is enough to feel the weight he was carrying, but that week Lucas applied Musashi's spirit fully. Act before the mind can resist. Mama. When Lucas opened his eyes, his heart was already pounding. Fear showed up as it always did, but he remembered Ken no Sen. No thinking, no hesitation. He grabbed his phone, opened his contacts, and hit call. "Miyamoto, we need to talk." The call lasted only a few seconds, and just as Musashi described, fear exploded afterward, not before. "What did you just do?" You should have prepared, is going to be upset. His mind screamed, but the action was already taken. The door had opened. There was no going back. The conversation at Miyamoto was hard, brutally hard. But it happened. And when it ended, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in years: power. Not the power to dominate others, but the power to free himself. Tuesday Beifuum. This was the hardest one, not because he didn't know what to do, but because he had spent so long using kindness as a shield to avoid discomfort. When he closed the door behind him, he sat across from the person he once loved and said the sentence he had been avoiding for half a year. We need to talk about us. No scripts, no mental preparation, no waiting for emotions to settle, only action instead of delay. The conversation was full of tears, tension, and pain. At moments he wanted to take it all back, at moments he felt cruel. But deep down he remembered Musashi's truth. The pain of action is temporary, the pain of inaction lasts forever. The investor call. This was the final test. This was the fear he dreaded most. He dialed the number. The ringing tone felt like a battlefield, and he whispered a line from the Book of Five Rings. The samurai who lives and the samurai who dies differ in only one thing. Mother hesitated. The investor answered. Lucas made his request directly, no excuses, no apologies, no shrinking, and the response was just one word. But what happened afterward more than anything else? The sting of rejection lasted maybe minutes. Then it faded completely. And what remained was a realization far more powerful than a yes. He survived. He was still standing, and he had faced the fear head-on. In 3 days, Lucas did 3 things he once believed required time, confidence, or mental readiness. But the truth was he only needed one thing: to act before the mind built its familiar walls. Ken no Sen doesn't turn someone into a hero. It simply gives them the chance to become the version of themselves that fear can no longer command. And in that moment, the cycle finally began to crack. Part Num. The principle of familiarization. When what you fear becomes what you understand, there is a line in Musashi's Book of Five Rings that most people read incorrectly, misunderstand, or are simply afraid to face. Become familiar with death every day. At first glance, it sounds dark, pessimistic, almost morbid. But Musashi never wrote anything to make humans weaker. He wrote to help them break free from fear, the root of all hesitation. And the true meaning of that line is this: fear only exists while something remains unknown. Once you become familiar with it, it loses its power over you. A fear itself isn't dangerous. It's what you avoid that destroys you. The primitive brain is programmed to treat the unfamiliar as danger. A new decision, a new change, a new challenge. The brain instantly inflates it into a threat. And the fascinating part is this: your brain cannot distinguish between real fear and imagined fear. It reacts to danger and possible danger in exactly the same way. That's why you tremble before saying something honest, why you panic before a presentation, and why you freeze before a decision you know you should make. To the brain, embarrassment, rejection, judgment, all of them are treated as if they were death. Not because it's logical, but because it was programmed this way millions of years ago. Musashi understood this early on. And he knew, if you want freedom, you must step into the darkness of fear. Stare at it long enough that it can no longer rule you. Lucas begins the experiment, becoming familiar with fear. After 3 days of acting through Ken no Sen, Lucas realized something important. Action breaks the cycle. But to avoid falling back into it, he had to retrain his entire nervous system. And there was only one way: familiarization. Not familiarization through thinking, not through books, not through positive affirmations, but familiarization through real experience, through repeated exposure to discomfort. Lucas set himself a day challenge. Every day do one thing that makes him uncomfortable. Even just a little big. Nothing dramatic, just something he normally avoids. And he treated each day like a warrior training a new instinct. A day more, he asked for a discount when buying coffee. Something he had never dared to do because he feared looking cheap or strange. The barista said, no prices. Face warmed. He felt awkward. But nothing terrible happened. A small lesson carved itself into his mind. A rejection won't kill me. A day high, he started a conversation with a stranger in the elevator. It lasted only a few sentences. The other person was curt, uninterested. But again, nothing collapsed. Another lesson formed. Awkwardness won't kill Deba. He posted a slightly controversial opinion online. Some agreed, some did. So world kept turning. The new lesson: being judged won't kill me. When the brain learns a new definition of fear, something strange began happening around Daemui. He noticed the familiar tightness in his chest. The old signal of fear was getting weaker, less sharp, more distant. It disappeared. It just lost authority. By day, Lucas did something previously unthinkable. He stood on a stage and spoke in front of Haitram people. No slides, no notes, no script. Just him, a microphone, and a commitment to not let fear speak for him. He stumbled a bit, forgot a few lines, but he stood firmly, like a completely different version of himself. And when he stepped off the stage, he knew this. He was no longer the man who ran from fear. He had become the man who walked straight into it. In this journey, Lucas finally understood a profound truth. Fear isn't a monster. It's just the darkness inside a room no one dared to turn the light on. Turn on the light, and the room becomes ordinary like any other. Part Sohishin. Maintaining everyday mind in unusual moments. There is a principle from Musashi that many people think is paradoxical, or even absurd, the first time they hear it. Keep the same state of mind in every situation. It sounds simple, but it is one of the most powerful psychological techniques Musashi ever left behind, because what destroys us in critical moments isn't fear itself, but the sudden emotional spike we create when we believe something is too important. It's the jerk of the mind that sends us into panic. Musashi called this principle the everyday mind. When you assign emotional privilege to important moments, you're digging your own grave. Almost everyone has this habit. Before a big presentation, before a crucial meeting, before a difficult conversation, before a life-changing decision, we psych ourselves out by saying, "This is important. Don't mess up. Prepare yourself mentally." These lines sound encouraging, but they all do one thing. They create emotional contrast. The brain hears, "This is dangerous. Activate alarm mode." And once the brain switches to non-ordinary mode, your body tightens, your breath shortens, your hands shake, and your ability to act smoothly disappears. You don't fail because you're incapable. You fail because you rarely maintain the same mental state under pressure. On the other hand, if you enter an important moment the same way you walk into your kitchen to drink a glass of water, the brain won't have time to activate fear. That is the power of Hishin. Lucas tries Hishin and discovers a strange effect. After mastering Ken no Sen and familiarizing himself with fear, Lucas noticed he still had one remaining enemy. A low, constant whisper, not loud, dramatic, but all whispering voice saying, "What if you mess up? What if they think you're not good enough? What if something goes wrong?" Musashi called this the silent killer of confidence. To defeat it, Lucas tried something that sounded almost foolish. Before important meetings, he intentionally stopped doing any kind of mental ritual. No pacing around, no pep talks, no mental pressure, no "get ready, this is important." He simply walked in the same way he walked in for lunch. Naturally, this raises a question. Isn't that irresponsible? Without mental preparation, how can you perform well? But what Lucas discovered afterward shocked him. Without anxiety rituals, the body naturally remains calm. Previously, before big meetings, Luz always told himself, "This meeting is important. I need to be ready." But that thought was actually a signal to the brain, "Danger, prepare for combat." And the brain responded with increased adrenaline, rapid heartbeat, tension, reduced flexibility, reduced clarity. But when Lucas walked into meetings without any emotional ritual, his entire nervous system stayed in its natural state, calm, open, attentive, reactive, sharp. Meetings became clearer, his presence stronger, and most importantly, he no longer entered battles with a trembling heart. Musashi once wrote, "Whether striking down an enemy or eating your meal, the mind must remain the same," not because he thought battles were trivial, but because he believed an ordinary mind is the strongest weapon. The transformation happens quietly, but unmistakably. 3 months of living with Hishin changed Lucas so much his friends thought he had become a completely different person. He no longer panicked before big events, froze in unexpected situations, tightened up under pressure, lived with chronic background fear. Instead, he became calm but sharp, decisive but not rushed, confident without forcing it, and most importantly, he no longer allowed any moment to become so special that he lost control of himself. That is everyday mind. Musashi's quiet superpower. Part B. The death of the old self. The necessary pain of growth. Most people want to change their lives, but very few want to pay the true price of transformation. The death of an old version of themselves. Musashi once wrote, "To become someone new, the old self must first die." It's not a physical death. It's the death of habits, identities, and stories we cling to in order to feel safe. And Lucas was about to enter this stage, the most painful, yet the most necessary part of his evolution. You cannot break an old cycle while clinging to an old identity. When Lucas began acting differently, hesitating less, needing less permission from his emotions, the world around him reeked it immediately. The first thing he noticed was, People become uncomfortable when you change. Some said he seemed colder. Some said he wasn't as sensitive anymore. Some even told him, "You are different now. You look emotionless." But the truth was far from that. Lucas wasn't becoming heartless. He was simply no longer controlled by the need to please everyone. For years, he wore identities that sounded like virtues. In the kind of person who understands everyone's feelings. In the one who always considers us careful. I never rushed decisions, beautiful on the surface. But in Lucas' case, they were just elegant masks hiding one truth. He feared upsetting others, so he allowed himself to suffer instead. When you finally act, people may mistake it for cruelty. When Lucas ended a relationship that had dragged on too long, the other person said, "You used to be so considerate. What happened to you? Why are you so cold now?" Lucas paused, then replied with a sentence that even shocked himself. "I'm not being cruel. I'm just done using your feelings as an excuse to avoid my own." That sentence sliced the air like a sword. It separated two versions of Lucas. The version that constantly sacrificed himself to avoid conflict, and the version willing to face real pain to free himself. That moment marked the death of a version of Lucas that had lived for years. It hurt. And it had to hurt, because that pain is the price of growth. Why real change always hurts? A behavioral psychologist from Yale once said, "When you change a deeply rooted behavioral pattern, the brain registers it as a real loss, and any loss activates confusion, fear, emotional pain. Not because you're wrong, but because the brain despises uncertainty. The old, and if harmful, is familiar, and familiarity gives the illusion of safety. So when you choose to change, you're not just building something new, you're destroying a part of your personal history that always hurts. No one escapes this phase. Musashi understood this more than anyone. Musashi himself had to die to be reborn. After decades of dueling, after solemnly undefeated battles, after becoming the most respected swordsman in Japan, Musashi did something no one understood, left the world of combat. Lived alone in a mountain, wrote, disappeared into silence. To the world it looked insane, but to Musashi it was wisdom, because a true warrior must be willing to abandon even the identity he is most proud of if that identity has become a cage. Lucas too had to let a version of himself die. Lucas once saw himself as the guy who can do everything alone. He prided himself on overworking, taking on everything and never asking for help. But as his company grew, he was forced to delegate, accept mistakes, learn to lead, let go of his ego that said only I can do it right. The version that handled everything alone had served him for many years, but now it had become a limitation. To level up, he had to let that version disappear. The brutal truth, everyone wants to change, but not everyone isn't to let their old self die. This is why so many people stay stuck. So many know what to do but never do it. So many live inside a loop of fear for decades. Not because they're weak, not because they lack opportunities, but because they refuse to go through the small death required for rebirth. Lucas finally understood this. He hurt, he grieved, he doubted, but he moved forward anyway. Because there is something far more terrifying than the pain of change, the pain of living your whole life as someone you no longer want to be. Part Tam, the way of the modern warrior. Living a life with no regret, Musashi died at age Samihai, alone in a cave. No glorious duel, no applause, no spotlight worthy of a legend. He died quietly, and he left one final line in his last manuscript. I regret nothing. Just one sentence, and it contains the essence of an entire lifetime. A life never ruled by fear and never shaped by hesitation. The brutal truth. Most people die full of regrets, not because they failed, but because they never even tried. Not because they made wrong choices, but because they made no choice at all. Not because they were weak, but because they allowed fear to become the invisible master of their lives. Life does not punish the ones who fail. Life punishes the ones who hesitate. All the important conversations you've avoided. All the moments you wanted to move but chose to stay still. All the opportunities you knew you should take, but waited for another day. They all become silent wounds, stacking over the years, turning into regret when you finally look back. The safety you cling to does not exist. You think you're safe in the familiar. But the truth is, you will eventually have to say goodbye to someone. You will eventually have to face change. You will eventually lose things. You will eventually make difficult decisions. You can delay today, but you cannot delay forever. What you avoid today will come back chasing you tomorrow. Life never lets anyone run forever. Either you confront things when the timing is right, or life will force you to confront them when you have no choice left. Musashi understood this in his bones. The fear you avoid does not disappear, it grows, it accumulates. It dictates your decisions, and one day it becomes an invisible master controlling your entire life. Lucas is not fictional. He is in all of us. Lucas doesn't exist, but Lucas lives in every one of us. In that tightening in your chest before telling the truth, in the email you wrote but didn't send, in the decision you know you must make but keep postponing, in the way you avoid certain questions because you fear the answer. The difference isn't that some people don't feel fear. Everyone feels this. Some people act anyway. So the real question is not, are you afraid? Of course you are. The real question is, will you let fear decide who you become? One day you will face the same question Musashi asked himself. If today were my last day, would I regret what I didn't do? Not regret what you did wrong, but regret what you never did. Regret the words left unspoken. Regret the endings you delayed too long. Regret the beginnings you never dared to start. Regret the years you lived small just to avoid shaking an old identity that no longer fit. Life is not as long as you think. Musashi knew it, Lucas learned it, and eventually you will learn it too. Either voluntarily or painfully. The final truth. Discipline is not force. It is identity. There is a mistake almost everyone makes. They believe that one day discipline will become easy. Musashi never believed that. He understood a truth the world avoids. There is no day that gets easier. There is only you becoming stronger. Humans are not born with iron will. Willpower is forged in the moments you force yourself to do the hard thing, the moments you stand up when no one is watching, the moments you keep going long after everyone else has stopped. A discipline is not a bridge you cross. It is the path you live on. Most people think, if I overcome a few challenges, I will become disciplined. But Musashi didn't treat discipline as a goal. He treated it as a state of being. A swordsman doesn't hold his blade only during battle. He carries the spirit of battle in every breath. Discipline works the same way. It is not an action. It is a way of existence. You don't wake up early to prove anything. You wake up early because that is the person you choose to be. You don't train your body out of vanity. You train because a strong body is the foundation of a strong mind. You don't choose solitude out of pride. You choose it because you know. Every form of inner strength is born in silence. Most people fail not because they are weak, but because they wait for motivation. They wait for the right morning. They wait for the perfect beginning. They wait for their emotions to rise. But a worry doesn't wait. Musashi never waited. He understood. Inspiration comes after action, not before. When you start, you generate energy. When you repeat, create momentum. When you persist, you build strength. And when you do it long enough, you build a new version of yourself. When discipline becomes identity, you stop trying and start being someone who lives by principle. You don't eat clean because you're forced to. You do it because junk makes your mind dull. You don't avoid toxic relationships out of fear. You avoid them because they pull you away from the identity you're building. You don't say no because you're cold. You say no because you respect your own time. One day you realize, discipline does not take freedom away from you. It is freedom from procrastination. Freedom from emotional chows. Freedom from temptation that derails your path. Freedom from the weaker version of yourself. And then you no longer ask, how do I stay disciplined? Because discipline has become you. It shows in the way you stand, the way you walk, the way you decide, the way you confront fear, and the way you keep your promises even when no one knows you made them. At that moment, you are no longer chasing goals, you are attracting them. You no longer need to fight for motivation. Action has become your natural rhythm, and you no longer need the world's approval, because you had already proven everything to yourself. Part Mui, crossing the final threshold, where change stops being effort and becomes instinct. There is a moment that anyone who persists long enough will eventually reach. A moment most people will never experience because they give up too early, long before the door even begins to open. Musashi described this moment with a single word. Natural, not natural as in effortless in. The difficult becomes familiar. The unfamiliar becomes normal. What once required force now flows through you like blood. In the early stage, you drag yourself. As if dragging a heavy stone, no one begins strong. The beginning is always unpleasant, tiring, discouraging. You have to pull yourself out of bed when the alarm rings. You have to fight the comfort of the warm blanket. You have to force yourself to finish what you started. You have to battle the procrastination inside your own mind. This is where most people quit, not because they're weak, but because they don't understand that this is the most narrow phase of becoming strong. There is no magic pill that makes discipline easy. No secret technique that instantly kills laziness. Every warrior must cross a dark valley, where you test yourself and your old self tries hardest to pull you back. At the middle stage, the stone begins to roll, and momentum appears. After some time, something strange happens. Waking up early is still hard but no longer painful. Working consistently is still demanding but no longer frightening. Saying no becomes easier. Staying focused feels more natural. It's not because the work has become lighter. It's because you have become stronger. Musashi once said, "The weak look for the easy path. The strong look for the right one." When you choose the right path day after day, you begin to develop the momentum of a strong person. You don't act just to finish, you act to become. This stage is subtle but absolutely vital. It is the border between someone who tries and someone who transforms. At the final stage, you become the momentum. This is the stage few imagine. The stage where discipline no longer exists outside you, but within you. You don't need motivation to start because starting is instinct. You don't need reminders because you hate the feeling of betraying your better self. You no longer have to push yourself to live well because living well becomes non-negotiable. You become someone who knows what must be done, knows what must be avoided, knows boundaries and priorities, knows what destroys their identity. This is the ultimate level of discipline becomes presence. No more struggle. No more inner ward. Only a strong, steady, calm current flowing through you. Some call this extreme, but in truth it is liberation. Liberation from your weaker self, but from self-sabotage. Liberation from emotional turbulence. Liberation from the chows of the outside world. The moment you realize you have changed, one morning you stand in front of the mirror and see different eyes. Deeper, clearer, calmer, you notice. You no longer run from things. You no longer fear beginnings. You no longer bend under criticism. You no longer disappoint yourself. Not because life is easier, but because you have grown into a new version of yourself. You have become the person your weaker self once dreamed of becoming. This is the greatest victory in a human life, the victory over oneself. And then Musashi's final insight becomes obvious. The struggle is not the price of struggle is the discipline. There is no shortcut, no miracle. Only you and your choices, repeated every day. When you change yourself, the world changes its shape. There is something Musashi never said outright, yet his entire life embodied it. When you change yourself deeply enough, you don't need to change your life. Life reorients itself toward you. This isn't poetic fluff, it's a law of existence. Throughout the journey we've just walked, from the first tremble of fear, to the inner battles, to the moment discipline became instinct. You may have realized something. Every great battle happens inside you. The world outside is not the enemy. It's not even the teacher. The world is simply a mirror, reflecting what is happening within. If you are chaotic, life will be chaotic. If you delay, life will delay. If you rise, life will rise with you. If you stand firm, the world will lean your way. Musashi understood this more than anyone. He didn't try to control the world. He controlled himself. And the world bowed. You are no longer the person you were at the beginning. If you made it here, you are no longer the version you once were. No longer the person tangled in old fears, no longer the one who dragged themselves forward each morning. Now you are someone who understands fear is a barrier, but a gateway, knows discipline isn't talent, but a repeated choice, realizes difficulty isn't a warning to stop, but a sign you are on the right path. You have seen who you can become. And no one can take that away. Even if tomorrow you stumble, if you grow tired, even if you get pulled back, you will never return to where you started. Because once you've seen your own strength, you can never unsee it. A life doesn't demand perfection. It only demands that you don't betray yourself. You don't have to be flawless. You don't have to win every day. You don't have to be strong forever. You only need one thing. Don't abandon the person you're becoming. Move slowly if you must. Rest if you must. Step back for a while if you must. Just don't stop. The small steps you take today are the foundation of the extraordinary person you will become tomorrow. A life can change entirely simply because someone refused to break a promise they once made to themselves. Musashi lived his entire life this way, and he left behind one truth that is both cold and beautiful. Discipline is freedom from your weaker self, freedom from emotional chows, freedom from fear's control, freedom from a life you no longer want. A farewell for you, the person stepping onto the path of the modern warrior. If something inside you shifted while listening to this video, it isn't temporary inspiration. It is the calling of a stronger, deeper, brighter version of you. The path ahead won't be easy. It is meant to be easy, because nothing easy is worth becoming. But you won't walk it alone. Each time you return to life philosophy, you'll find a reminder, a story, a principle, a new blade for your mind. I'm not here to teach you how to live. I'm simply the one holding the lantern so you can see the path that has always been inside you. If you're hearing this message now, I want to tell you something simple. You are enough to stop, but enough to begin. And as you take your next steps, remember, it's normal for the body to tire. It's normal for the mind to doubt. It's normal for the world to criticize, but giving up, that is never normal for a warrior. I'll meet you in the next video, where we'll once again sharpen the mind, find stillness in the chaos, and continue building the strongest version of you were born to become. Follow life philosophy so you never miss the next step of the journey. See you on the path meant for those brave enough to become themselves.